You are watching the World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. Let's begin with the top stories you need to know. Moving to resume bilateral engagements after the border disengagement, Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri landed in Beijing on Sunday and met a top Chinese Communist Party leader. US President Donald Trump says he will impose tariffs and sanctions on Colombia after Bogota turned away 2 flights carrying deported migrants. Donald Trump has said Jordan and Egypt should take in more Palestinians from Gaza, adding that he wanted to clean out the enclave, but Egypt and Jordan have rejected Trump's proposed plan to transfer Palestinians to other countries. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has been indicted on insurrection allegations, the first time a sitting president has faced criminal charges in the country. China's veteran Foreign Minister Wang Yi has issued a veiled warning to America's new Secretary of State to behave himself. Well, a big focus. India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri arrived at Beijing on Sunday to kickstart a fresh round of bilateral talks with China following the disengagement of troops along the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh. Mr. Misri met with the head of the International Department of the Chinese Communist Party, marking a significant step in efforts to stabilize relations between our two countries. But according to China's state-run Global Times, during this meeting, both sides discussed key issues, including the implementation of the consensus reached by their leaders, strengthening exchanges, and advancing the development of China-India relations. They also touched upon regional and global matters of mutual interest, is what Global Times is reporting. But Mr. Misri is set to meet China's Vice Foreign Minister today to continue the talks, and this visit actually signals an attempt to repair ties that were severely strained following a military standoff triggered by Chinese incursions into Indian territory back in 2020. Earlier, Chinese officials indicated that both nations were exploring ways to return relations to a normal state, similar to the period before the border tensions escalated in the spring of 2020. For further clarity, we have with us Brahma Chelani on the broadcast. As always, sir, thank you so much for making time for us. Now, in terms of restoring bilateral relations, what would you say are the key diplomatic hurdles India and China need to overcome to restore this relationship to what it actually was before the border clashes?
The two sides have different motivations to mend their bilateral ties, but the underlying Sino-Indian strategic rivalry is clearly a bottleneck. China, of course, is facing increasing Western pushback against its expansionism. Its economy is sputtering. It is running into long-term growth constraints, including a shrinking and rapidly aging population and slowing productivity increase. So it has a clear motivation to improve relations with its largest neighbor, India. But we should not forget that even in the period since Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping met on the sidelines of the BRICS summit on October 23rd, since then, there have been Chinese provocative moves, for example, including parts of Indian Ladakh in 2 new counties that China has established, or announcing that it's proceeding with building a super dam that amounts to waging a stealth water war against India. So given that background, we have to be very cautious, and I think India is being very cautious in terms of seeking to restore the relationship with Beijing.
Right, but when we consider the intentions of this visit, sir, do you think this signals a genuine desire from both sides to stabilize relations? Or is it more about managing tensions while maintaining strategic leverage?
It's largely from the Chinese side to manage the relationship with India without conceding ground in a meaningful way, which is the reason why even today, India's patrolling rights in eastern Ladakh have not been fully restored. Right. And as the Indian Army chief has said publicly, that the military standoff between the two countries still continues to a degree. So until and unless the border tensions are fully diffused, that China pulls back the forces it has massed on the Himalayan frontier, there can be no border stability or border tranquility.
Right.
These actions of China happen in violation of binding bilateral agreements with India. Also, we should not forget that after the standoff began, China unilaterally, in violation of its bilateral agreement with India, stopped sharing hydrological data on river flows with India. Yes. So there is a Chinese record of turning its back on binding agreements, and that's the reason why India is very cautiously proceeding with the current process of improving bilateral relations.
Well, sir, meanwhile, the Indonesian president's visit to New Delhi this weekend, it suggests potential defense deals. How do you view India's increased defense cooperation with Southeast Asian nations in light of the ongoing engagement with China? Is this the way to hedge against regional uncertainties?
I think inviting the Indonesian president to be the chief guest at India's Republic Day was a very good move.
Right.
We tend to get too focused on few neighbors of ours. We forget that Indonesia is also India's neighbor. The sea frontiers of India and Indonesia converge. Indonesia is a critical partner for India in Southeast Asia. It is a thriving democracy today, and India-Indonesia relations need to deepen, they need to expand, and I think if India-Indonesia defense cooperation takes off, that would be good for both countries.
Right, as always, sir, thank you so much for making time for us on NDTV and joining us with your views. With that, let's turn our attention to America now. US President Donald Trump said he will impose tariffs and sanctions on Colombia after Bogota turned away 2 flights carrying deported migrants. The left-wing Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, specifically took issue with Washington's use of military planes for the flights, calling it degrading. The measures, which include 25% emergency tariffs and a travel ban targeting Colombian officials, could mark Trump's first use of economic retaliation on a foreign government to push his immigration agenda since taking office. But Trump may be trying to make an example of Colombia and dissuade other Latin American countries from defying him. This is what some analysts argue. But as geopolitical experts highlight, this sends a powerful message to the world that not even old political allies are safe if they do not cooperate. And to South Korea now, where President Yoon Suk-yeol was indicted on insurrection allegations, the first time a sitting president has faced criminal charges in the country. Mr. Yoon has been under investigation and detained over his botched December attempt to impose martial law, plunging his country into political chaos. He has been suspended from office while a court mulls whether to remove him permanently. But throughout this crisis, Yoon has been outspoken in his opposition to the probe, and his approval rating, which was actually at rock bottom, has somewhat rebounded since his arrest, not unlike another world leader. But Yoon has the example of Trump, who has been very vocal throughout his legal travails, is what some experts are arguing. Here are the details.
South Korean prosecutors have officially indicted impeached President Yoon on charges of leading an insurrection tied to his brief and controversial declaration of martial law in December 3rd. Yoon is accused of being the ringleader of an insurrection, a charge never brought before against a sitting South Korean president, and it's a serious one. If convicted, Yoon faces life imprisonment or even the death penalty, although South Korea has not executed anyone in decades. The indictment comes after Yoon became the first sitting president in South Korean history to be arrested on January 15th. After a tense standoff, prosecutors finally forced him to surrender at his residence. Now, South Korea's top court has the high-stakes job of deciding whether Yoon should be removed from office or have his powers reinstated. A ruling is expected within the next 6 months, and if Yoon is ousted, a new election would be held within 60 days. Yoon's martial law triggered a political firestorm shaking South Korea's government and economy. The prime minister was also impeached and suspended, and several senior military officials are now facing charges linked to the alleged insurrection. Yoon has denied all charges, insisting his martial law was a legitimate act to protect the country. He claims the measure was necessary to expose what he sees as the dangers of a liberal-controlled National Assembly. The political drama in South Korea is far from over. For now, the world watches as this unprecedented case unfolds. Samia Afsar, NDTV World.
Further clarity on what's happening as far as South Korea is concerned, we have with us Ray Locker. As always, Ray, thanks so much for joining us. What does Yoon Suk Yeol's indictment on insurrection charges actually mean for South Korea's political landscape, given it's the first time a sitting president has faced criminal charges?
It means continued instability in South Korea, a country that's important to the Western alliance because of its neighboring, its border with North Korea, its proximity to China. And it's something that we, from our perspective, we just can't afford to have.
Right, Ray. Also, Mr. Yoon's situation has actually been compared to Donald Trump's legal battles. Do you think this comparison is valid? And also, how might Yoon's vocal opposition to the investigation impact his future then?
Well, I think it's very valid. I mean, I think Donald Trump should be in a position that Yoon is in right now. He should have gotten bounced out of office in 2021 after January 6th riots. He should have been impeached then. He should not have been able to run for re-election last year. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. I think South Korea is doing it the right way.
Well, Ray, let's wait and watch what happens as far as South Korea is concerned. There is a crisis breaking out as we speak. We will, of course, revert to you for regular updates on the entire drama that's unfolding in South Korea. Meanwhile, Hamas has announced it will release 6 hostages this week, while the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has confirmed that residents of northern Gaza will be allowed to return to their homes starting today. Among the hostages to be freed is Abel Yehud, a civilian whose case has been at the center of a diplomatic standoff that delayed the return of Gazans to northern areas. But over the weekend, Hamas released 4 Israeli soldiers but withheld Yehud, prompting Israel to accuse the group of breaching the terms of the ceasefire deal. Now, under the agreement, Hamas was expected to release civilians first in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Since the ceasefire came into effect, a total of 7 hostages and more than 200 Palestinian prisoners have been released, signaling slow but ongoing process in the exchange process. Here's our report.
For 476 days, 4 young Israeli soldiers, Liri Albag, Karina Ariev, Daniela Gilboa, and Nama Levy lived in captivity, taken hostage during Hamas's October 7th attack on the Nahal Oz military base near Gaza. They have finally returned home, embraced by their emotional families in southern Israel. The young soldiers, all aged 19 or 20, served in a lookout unit monitoring threats along the border. Their release came after weeks of negotiations and as part of a fragile ceasefire. In the West Bank, the atmosphere was one of jubilation. Thousands of Palestinians filled the streets of Ramallah as buses carrying prisoners rolled in. Men who had spent decades behind bars were carried aloft by cheering crowds, celebrating their return to freedom. Among the released were 200 Palestinian prisoners, including 120 serving life sentences for deadly attacks. But for around 70 others who are banned from returning to Israel or Palestinian territory, freedom came with exile. They were sent to Egypt and will eventually be relocated to other countries, including Algeria, Tunisia, and Turkey. The exchange was bittersweet. Israel's military expressed a relief over the hostages' return, but reminded the world of the brutal toll of Hamas's October 7th attack, which left over 1,200 Israelis dead. For Palestinians, the celebrations were a brief respite in a war that has devastated Gaza, with more than 47,000 lives lost, according to Gaza health authorities. If this war has brought both sides together on any front, it's in their shared grief. Families on both sides mourn immeasurable losses. While this is just the first phase of the ceasefire, hostages reunite with their loved ones and prisoners taste freedom, the scars of this conflict remain. With Ridhima Kedia, Bureau Report, NDTV World.
My colleague Mohammad Ghazali has been tracking all the finer details for us. He joins us live at the moment. Ghazali, 4 Israeli soldiers, 200 Palestinians have been released under this Gaza truce deal. What are the latest details you can disclose at the moment?
As per the Israeli government, there was one civilian hostage who was scheduled to be released on Saturday, which Hamas perhaps refused to release. And Hamas said that they had some internal kind of disagreement with Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another armed faction which operates in Gaza. And perhaps that is why they couldn't release that civilian hostage. But Israeli Prime Minister Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu was very adamant that as per the agreement, the civilian hostage was scheduled to be released on Saturday. And since Hamas didn't release him, that is why he won't allow Gaza's residents from moving towards northern Gaza, and that is why thousands of Gaza residents have been holed up near the border of northern Gaza. And yesterday, after hectic negotiations between Qatar and Egypt asking Hamas to release the civilian hostage, the Prime Minister of Israel has now announced late night that Hamas will release this civilian hostage on Thursday, and an additional 3 hostages, as per schedule, will be released on the coming Saturday. And from 8 a.m. onwards, India time at around 11:30 a.m. onwards, the Gaza residents who were stopped before moving towards the northern side of the Gaza will be allowed to go back to their own region. So some movement thereafter, negotiations between all the stakeholders, the latest being that one more civilian hostage will be released on Thursday. As per schedule, every Saturday the release and exchange has to happen. So the first stage of ceasefire, which goes on for 42 days, it still goes on, yet Israel continues to attack residents in Gaza. Reports suggest that perhaps even yesterday, when residents were waiting to move towards northern Gaza, they were stopped by army, and the entire crowd faced some kind of gunfire from Israel's side. Israeli army's presence is still there in the Gaza Strip, and 2 people were killed in that gunfire. Meanwhile, situation also remains tense in the West Bank, the occupied territory of West Bank, which is under Palestinian Authority. And even there, in the last 1 week, several people have been killed, either in aerial strikes, drone strikes, or by the Israeli army.
As always, Mohammad Ghazali, thank you so much for joining us with the latest details coming in. As Ghazali is reporting, thousands of Palestinians have spent a second night sleeping on the street as they actually wait for Israeli forces to allow them to pass through the Netzarim corridor. But meanwhile, Donald Trump has resumed shipments of 2,000-pound bombs to Israel amid the ongoing Gaza war. The development came mere days after a 6-week ceasefire went into effect, but the protests also floating a plan to clean out Gaza. Delivery of these deadly bombs had been halted under the previous Joe Biden administration in a bid to actually reduce civilian casualties. And the former US president's decision to halt the delivery of one shipment of 2,000-pound bomb last May triggered one of the biggest crises of the US-Israel relationship. It's actually one of the biggest crises that they have faced during their 15-month war in Gaza. By the way, you must note that Joe Biden's administration had also delivered thousands of these powerful 2,000-pound bombs in the early days of the war, before shipments were halted due to concerns about civilian casualties. Meanwhile, Mr. Netanyahu thanked Trump for giving Israel tools of defense. Listen in to what the Israeli Prime Minister had to say.
Thank you, President Trump, for keeping your promise to give Israel the tools it needs to defend itself, to confront our common enemies, and to secure a future of peace and prosperity.
Well, the Israeli army, by the way, has killed at least 22 people in southern Lebanon on the day its forces were due to withdraw under a ceasefire deal. This is according to health officials. But in a statement, Lebanon's Ministry of Public Health has said that at least 124 people were also wounded as the Israeli army opened fire as people tried to return to their homes. The Israeli killings violate a ceasefire agreement reached in November, under which its forces were supposed to withdraw from Lebanon on Sunday. Well, with that, let's turn our attention now to Canada, where former Indo-Canadian MP Ruby Dhalla has announced that she will participate in the leadership race of the ruling Liberal Party to succeed Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. She entered the race on the eve of the deadline for candidates to declare themselves, the 23rd of January, though her campaign will still have to submit the fee of about $350,000 Canadian dollars, that's about $243,000 US dollars, to qualify. But Ruby Dhalla was first elected to the House of Commons back in 2004 from the erstwhile riding of Brampton-Springdale. She was re-elected in 2006 and 2008, but lost in 2011 and opted not to contest in 2015 when the Liberals came into power with a majority. Her victory in the 2004 federal election, though, made her, along with Conservative Nina Grewal, the first woman of Indian origin to be elected to the House.
Fellow Canadians and members of the Liberal Party to join me.
We're slipping into a very short break, but news and updates continue in a moment. Do stay tuned. Well, Turkey has arrested 15 people, including the owner and management of the Grand Kartal Hotel, following a fire at the ski resort that killed 78 people earlier this week. Now, the blaze, which started in the hotel's restaurant at about 3:30 a.m., forced panicked guests to jump from windows, and state media is reporting that judicial proceedings are ongoing for the deputy mayor of Bolu province and the local fire chief as well. But independent experts reveal that the 12-story hotel lacked basic fire safety measures. And Turkey's president has vowed to hold all responsible parties accountable, while the hotel's management has promised full cooperation. But this incident has reignited calls for stricter safety regulations across Turkey. Well, let's switch tracks now. US President Donald Trump is in discussions with multiple parties over the potential purchase of TikTok. In fact, speaking aboard Air Force One, Trump said a decision on the app's future will likely come within 30 days. But according to multiple local media reports, the White House is negotiating a deal involving software giant Oracle and a group of US investors to take control of TikTok's operations. Under the proposed arrangement, ByteDance, which is actually TikTok's China-based owner, would retain a stake while Oracle would oversee data collection and software updates. Trump has emphasized the significant interest in TikTok but made no mention of specific buyers. The plan is part of the administration's efforts to address national security concerns surrounding this app. For further clarity, we have with us Ray Locker on this as well. Ray, thanks so much for joining us with a quick comment. Now, given the ongoing security concerns around TikTok's data practices, how likely is it that the US will push for a sale of the app, and what are the key issues involved?
Well, the security concerns still exist, and ByteDance needs to sell it to somebody who's not tied in with the Chinese government.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if that's going to happen. I mean, Donald Trump says a lot of things all the time, and it's hard to determine what's true or what's not. At one point, he said maybe the U.S. government should buy TikTok, which is insane. So who knows what's going to happen?
Right, Ray, but if a sale were to go through, let's just say if it was to go through, what would this mean for other tech companies that are facing similar scrutiny? Could this actually set a dangerous precedent for foreign-owned apps within the U.S.?
Oh, I think so. Look, if you're deemed a threat by the U.S. government, maybe you're going to be forced to sell. And if we see what happens with TikTok in the next, month or so, then that is a template for other companies to kind of fall into.
Well, let's wait and watch how this plays out. Donald Trump is in discussions with multiple parties over the potential purchase of TikTok, is what local media is reporting. Thanks so much, Ray, as always, for joining us with the latest on this. We will, of course, revert to you for regular updates. Meanwhile, Elon Musk has asked a Texas federal judge to dismiss a class action lawsuit accusing him of defrauding voters with a $1 million a day giveaway. The plaintiffs actually claim that Elon Musk and his political action committee, America PAC, misled voters into signing a petition in support of the US Constitution. In terms of what Musk has said, well, Elon Musk argued that participants were told they could earn the $1 million by becoming America PAC spokespeople rather than winning it randomly. In fact, the Tesla CEO insisted that the giveaway did not qualify as a lottery under Texas law, But Elon Musk has asked a Texas federal judge to dismiss this class action lawsuit that accuses him of defrauding voters with this $1 million a day giveaway. As always, thank you so much for investing your time and watching this edition of The World 24/7. We will keep tracking the latest updates for you. Do stay tuned.